Pandora Syndrome. Written by April Walleen. Read by April Walleen. Directed and recorded by Andreas Gallego. Chapter 11. Inquiry. The incident with the werewolves ended up being the straw that broke the camel's back with the powers that be. My stunt at the graveyard and the events at the Gower Gulch hadn't gone unnoticed either. Remy had warned me that something like this might happen. It wasn't like armies of undead were summoned every day. I'd been surprised when the letter arrived in the mail. I hadn't received a letter from anyone since my turning, let alone having one arrive at Remy's home. One of the perks of being a vampire was that you're virtually removed from the human grid. That included junk mail and telemarketing lists. I didn't even get jury duty notices anymore. That one made sense since I was no longer considered a peer that could serve on a human jury, as I was technically a former member of the human race. Not that I was upset about that. The letter was delivered in a thick black envelope with my name scrawled across the front of it in gilded calligraphy. Swanky. Remy stood silently watching me as I examined the ominous envelope. "This is bad, right?" I asked him tensely. He sighed. "It likely is not good," he replied. I grimaced. "Would you like me to open it for you?" he offered. "No," I sighed. "I'm a big vampire. I can open my own death sentences." "That is not funny, Pandora," he frowned in annoyance. "Besides, you would have received at least 2 more of these before that was a possibility." My eyes widened a little. I guess the supernatural community had a 3-strike policy. With a deep breath, I steeled my nerves, pushed back my panic, and ran my finger beneath the wax seal, yes, wax, like an old-fashioned scroll or Maker's Mark bottle. The imprinted emblem was a stylized O. I assumed that stood for the Order. Remy just nodded as he picked up on my thoughts. Once the seal popped open, I carefully removed the single sheet of strangely translucent paper. It was almost like wax paper, but thicker and less slick. "It's vellum," Remy told me then. "It and papyrus have gone out of fashion, but it's good for inkwells, so they still use it when sending official ordinances." "Fancy," I chuckled nervously, and then began to read the letter out loud. "Pandora Gray Todd, you are hereby summoned for an official inquiry by the Order. Our representative will interview you regarding the incident at the residence of one Los Angeles Territory Packmaster. Please prepare all pertinent documents, supporting statements, and physical evidence. Sincerely, Agent 72, Department of Inquiries." I stared back up at Remy with a sinking feeling. Do I get a lawyer? It sounds like I need a lawyer. "A vampire lawyer," Remy smirked at me. "No such person. A court representative will talk to us about the attack, but we are to represent ourselves." "We?" I asked nervously. "Oh no, you're not in trouble too, are you? The letter's only addressed to me." "As your maker, I am expected to go," he replied. "Do not worry about me. This is not your fault. You were defending yourself, and we will make that apparent," he said, pulling me into his embrace. "So we are going to be interviewed by a hunter?" I asked dubiously. "No, you will be interviewed by a member of the Order." "And that's not a hunter?" I felt like I should have known this, but the inner workings of the Order, or supernatural community as a whole, had never been of much interest to me. I hoped that wouldn't come around to bite me in the ass. "There are several branches of the Order, just like the human government. We are seeing what is essentially a judge. There aren't many of these, only a handful per city, and they are very busy. So the fact that we are to see one of them soon it is not good." "Wonderful," I grumbled. A week later, we sat in a nice little living room with plush couches. To say that this was not what I had expected was an understatement. I'd been imagining a large courtroom with a jury of vampires hissing for my blood, and a demonic judge complete with white curly wig and red horns. "You have quite the imagination, Pandora," Remy muttered with a raised eyebrow. "Some of it's my imagination, some of it's old Saturday morning cartoons," I replied with a shrug. A short woman with oddly pointed ears had led us into the nice little house. Her hair seemed to have been styled in an attempt to conceal them, but it hadn't worked as the tips stuck out through the wavy updo. She had said nothing to us, just led us to the plush couch that sat before a desk piled high with papers and files. Aside from the mess of the desk, the house seemed rather tidy, with its lace curtains and neat little baubles arranged just so on end tables and mantels. It seemed oddly intimate to me, but Remy didn't look bothered by it, so I just had to ignore the weirdness of it, push back my foreboding sense of doom, and take this interview as it came. Remy and I had gone over all the details of the event. We'd recorded the places, times, and actions. Then we'd sent a copy to the order and brought another with us for the judge. Luckily, we didn't have long to wait before a tall, thin woman with wavy black hair and spectacles came walking in. She couldn't be much past 35. The woman looked of Spanish descent with her thick hair and light olive skin. She carried a silver tray with an ornate little teapot and dark brown cookies atop it. With a prim smile, she placed the tray on the coffee table before us. "Please help yourself," she said with a faint accent as she gestured to the tray and walked around the desk to take a seat. "I am your interviewer, 1872. You may call me 72 since this is an informal inquiry. Are you ready to begin?" I stared in disbelief. I thought the woman a secretary or something, not my judge. The fact that she was Spanish and this was an inquisition did not escape me. A faint giggle escaped my lips, and Remy kicked me lightly beneath the coffee table, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation. I bit my lip, trying to quell my amusement. After all, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Luckily, the woman didn't seem to notice my momentary lapse in sanity. "Yes, we are ready," Remy answered for me, giving me time to compose myself, and handed out our documents to 72, who sat back and quickly perused the papers. "Please, have some refreshments while I go over a few things in your file." I nodded, and Remy went to pour 2 cups of the tea for us. Needless to say, I was surprised when warm blood came pouring out of the pot instead of actual tea. Of course they would have refreshments for our kind. I'm sure they were prepared for all sorts when conducting these meetings. Tentatively, I dipped a dark biscuit in the blood and tried it. My eyes lit with surprise. The cookies were made of sweet congealed blood that was mixed with something else I couldn't identify. "Liver and spices," Remy told me quietly, nodding at the biscuit as he took one for himself. "They're good. Why don't you have any of these at the house?" "They aren't red vines. I didn't think you would like them." "I like other things than just red vines." Remy smirked at me then. "We will get you some after the interview." I watched 72 as she perused our papers, tipping her glasses this way and that while making little clicking noises of disapproval as she read. "So, a vampire necromancer," she said finally, putting the file back down on the desk in front of her. "Can't say I've ever heard of that before." "Necromancers are quite rare," Remy nodded to her in agreement. "It's a difficult trade to learn, and I've only ever seen human necromancers, though few are strong enough to withstand the lure of death itself. You, however, being a vampire, do not have that problem, I imagine." She smiled a little. "I've seen vampires that control ghouls before, but they're just half-dead humans, kept alive with drops of vampire blood." She looked back down at the file then. "So, the backyard of a local packmaster." I fought the urge to shrink back into my chair. Well, I can see why Dirk Hargrove of Los Angeles Pack would make a formal complaint. I have been fortunate enough to dine at his home, and Lana is very proud of her lawn." At that, I sank back in my chair. Great. 72 was a friend of Dirk's. I was toast. "From the testimonials of guests present at the event, it has been stated that the undead invaders were quite a bit fresher than the skeletons you reportedly called up from under Dirk's home. This seems to support your argument that the home invasion was not your doing." "Why would I raise undead to crash Dirk's party and then raise more to stop them?" I asked plainly. Remy took my hand gently, urging me to be quiet. "We do not know. We also do not know why anyone would want to send undead to a werewolf gathering if not for your presence there." I sank back into my seat so far I was about to slide off of it. "We have come to a similar conclusion and plan to search out the perpetrator," Remy replied, trying to do some damage control. "You will leave that to the hunters, Romulus of Rome," she told him. "I understand that you've done consulting work with them, as well as the Order itself. This speaks highly for both you and your progeny. Nonetheless, you are too close to this situation. If we need your assistance, a summons will be sent to you." Remy nodded reluctantly, and I had the feeling he would be doing some searching of his own, with or without the permission of the Order. As would I. "We have surveyed the Packmaster's land and found that it was indeed built on top of an old burial ground, one that did not feed the numbers in the first wave of the attack." Witnesses have also stated that when the unidentified undead were defeated, you sent your skeletons back into the earth. This also supports your claim that this was not all you're doing." "Thank you," I sighed in relief. Both 72 and Remy eyed me. I went quiet. "Unless, of course, you're trying to show off in front of the wolves," 72 continued. "That seems unlikely, seeing as how angering such a pack would result in the death of even an elder vampire like yourself. This is also your first real infraction. We will not count past vampire attacks on your person or the complaint filed by a local vampire coven, as they were quickly rescinded when it was proven that they were indeed trespassing on werewolf territory." She glanced at the file again. "You have stated they have been working with the offending necromancer at large?" "That is correct," Remy replied. She sighed and scribbled in the file on her desk while Remy and I sat silent as the grave. "All right," she announced, closing the file and folding her hands on top of it. "You will be on probation for the period of 1 year, meaning you will be watched by the hunters at their discretion. Do your best to let them go about their business. Your maker will dictate the rest of your freedoms. However, if another complaint arises, harsher measures may be taken in the future. Any questions?" I sat stunned. That didn't sound nearly as horrible as I was expecting. Of course, anything seemed better than being chained in a coffin and buried for several years. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. Remy nodded his head and 72 rose from her seat. Remy and I followed suit, shook hands with the woman, and quickly exited the premises. "Well, I think that went rather well," Remy said after a while. I nodded and smiled a little as he stopped and pulled me in for a kiss. It was comforting, and just what I needed. Reassurance that everything was going to be fine. After a long, soothing embrace, Remy pulled me into his side, and we continued on down the dark path to his place. I had no more words for the happenings of the last week. I'd learned a valuable lesson. I needed to know more about the larger supernatural community that I was a part of, not just other vampires. I needed to be prepared for encounters with other beings, especially if they were going to see me as a challenge. I'd been lucky to stay so under the radar the last few decades. Now that I'd been forced out into the moonlight, I was not going to be caught unaware. Not that I planned to be dredging up undead every other night. There were other tricks a learned necromancer could use to their advantage. Tricks I'd seen the necromancer use to hide, to escape unseen. If he could do it, why couldn't I? If I mastered these things, then perhaps I could track down that pesky necromancer and end this madness once and for all. I needed to learn all that I could, not just about necromancy, so it definitely looked like I would be spending more time in Remy's library. There were whole sections on creatures that I'd never bothered to look at. No matter how hard I tried, I knew I would never be like the other vampires. I probably wouldn't be like other necromancers either. Even if I had the right bloodthirsty temperament, there was no way I would ever be a true night-stalking fiend. I'd forever be a strange hybrid in a category of my own. I was going to have to find my own way as a vampire necromancer. Problem was, it seemed that no one was okay with that, except Remy, because he loved me. I also had my loving dog Sarge, my brother, and Hank. Then there was Mel. Poor Mel. Maybe if I learned more about werewolves, I could find a way to help her. One thing was apparent. I was going to have to watch my P's and Q's now that the hunters had carte blanche to stalk me. But now that the incident with the undead had happened, I couldn't go back to just playing video games and ignoring the world around me. Remy would help me, but I needed to do my own research. It was clear that if I didn't figure out what I could do, the necromancer would do it for me, and I could not let that happen. After my informal inquiry, I kept a low profile. It was lonely without Mel, but I was assured that she would eventually be released from her pack's charge. I just hoped she would have all of her limbs. As the weeks passed, Remy helped me search for a way to track down the necromancer. Unfortunately, all our efforts came up with nothing. I used the awareness of death around me to feel for that power, his power. There was nothing, just the usual sense of graveyards and those close to death. So, I studied, and watched, and prepared myself as best I could for what was to come next. So for the time being, I'd managed to escape entombment by the hunters. Unfortunately, thanks to the necromancer, I would eventually end up in a box after all. Despite my best efforts, my studying, my research, I'd fallen into their trap. I reminded myself that all hope was not gone. My mind was still functioning. I was still alive. As long as I could think, remember, be, I was not done with my enemy. I was growing tired again. All this thinking, this remembering, good though it may be, was exhausting. The coffee shop above had closed for the evening, and I sighed in relief. I usually hated silence, but not as much as the constant whirring of grinders and hissing of steamers. The sounds that reminded me of the life that was going on around me, without me. Drifting into the quiet darkness, I remembered the days when I knew Mel was alive, if not being sequestered with her pack. Remy was alive, my brother was happily undead, and I had survived the Spanish Inquisition. So, I faded back into my half-sleep, dead to the world until I'd eventually be woken again by the distant chattering of coffee shop patrons and Ahab's employees. With Remy's face in my mind, I drifted and dreamt of the day I might be freed. The day I might see him in his beautiful silvery blue eyes again.
The end.